Whispers in the abyss. The train to Hollow Creek was nearly empty when I boarded. It was an old locomotive, the kind that rattled and creaked with every turn. The compartments smelled of aged leather and dust, and the dim lights flickered every so often, as if struggling to stay alive. Outside, the evening sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of deep crimson and gold. I was traveling alone, with nothing but a small suitcase and my camera bag. As a freelance journalist, I thrived on stories others were too afraid to tell. And Hollow Creek had plenty of those. The town was infamous for its abandoned mines and the disappearances tied to them. For years, locals spoke of a presence in the mines, an entity they referred to only as the Whisperer. I didn't believe in ghost stories, but the allure of uncovering the truth was too tempting. If I could document the mystery, it would be my breakthrough. That's what I told myself as the train rumbled on, carrying me deeper into the unknown. Arrival in Hollow Creek. The station was deserted when I arrived. A single flickering street lamp illuminated the platform, casting long, wavering shadows. The air was heavy with the scent of rain and earth, and the town itself seemed cloaked in an eerie stillness. I checked into a small, dilapidated inn near the station. The owner, an elderly woman with clouded eyes, handed me a rusted key without saying a word. Her gnarled fingers trembled as they brushed mine, and for a moment she held my gaze. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'll be fine," I replied with forced confidence, though her words lingered in my mind. The room was sparse but serviceable. A single bed, a wooden chair, and a window that looked out onto the shadowy streets. As I unpacked, I felt the weight of the town's silence pressing in. Even the usual hum of insects or distant murmurs of life were absent. The first night, sleep came fitfully. At some point during the night, I awoke to a faint sound. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible. A whisper, carried on an unfelt breeze. I sat up, my heart pounding. The sound grew louder, though its source remained elusive. It wasn't a language I recognized, a series of guttural tones and sibilant murmurs that seemed to scrape against the edges of my sanity. I grabbed my camera and stepped to the window. The street below was empty, bathed in the pale glow of the moon. But in the distance, near the edge of town, I saw a flicker of movement. A figure, barely discernible, disappearing into the darkness. The mines. The next morning I ventured to the mines. They were located on the outskirts of town, past a dense forest that seemed to swallow the light. The path was overgrown, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and rotting leaves. I had asked around the town for directions, but no one would speak to me. Their silence was louder than words. The entrance to the mines was marked by a weathered wooden arch, its beams splintered and sagging under the weight of time. Rusted chains hung loosely across the opening, a feeble attempt to keep people out. I ducked under them and stepped inside. The air changed immediately, growing colder and heavier. My flashlight illuminated the narrow passage, its beam cutting through the darkness. The walls were lined with jagged rocks, glistening with moisture. The ground beneath my boots crunched with loose gravel and debris. It didn't take long before the whispers returned, deeper into the abyss. At first, I thought it was just the sound of the wind funneling through the tunnels. But the whispers grew more distinct, more intentional. They seemed to beckon me, leading me deeper into the labyrinthine passages. My heart raced, but I couldn't turn back. The journalist in me demanded answers. As I ventured further, I came across strange markings on the walls. Symbols etched into the rock, their meanings indecipherable. Some resembled eyes, others were jagged spirals that seemed to twist endlessly. My camera clicked as I documented everything, though the oppressive feeling in my chest grew with each step. And then I saw it. A figure stood at the end of the tunnel, shrouded in darkness. Its outline was faint, almost translucent, but unmistakable. It didn't move, didn't speak. Simply stood there watching. "Hello," I called, my voice trembling. The figure vanished. The chamber. I stumbled upon the chamber an hour later. It was a massive cavern, its ceiling disappearing into the shadows above. Stalactites hung like jagged teeth, and the floor was covered in a thin layer of water that reflected the faint light of my flashlight. At the center of the chamber stood an altar, carved from the same stone as the walls. It was covered in the same symbols I'd seen earlier, but these were smeared with a dark, rust-colored substance that I dared not identify. Surrounding the altar were bones, too many to count. Some were animal, but others were unmistakably human. The whispers crescendoed, filling the chamber with their chaotic symphony. My flashlight flickered, and the air grew colder still. I felt a presence behind me, an overwhelming sense of being watched. Turning slowly, I saw it again. The figure. This time it was closer. It had no discernible features, its face a void of shifting shadows. But its eyes, or where its eyes should have been, burned with an unnatural light. It raised an arm, its fingers impossibly long and thin, and pointed at the altar. "Why are you here?" it whispered, though its mouth didn't move. The voice was inside my head, each word reverberating painfully. "Hey, I'm just looking for answers," I stammered, my voice barely audible. The figure tilted its head, as if considering my response. Then it vanished. The escape. Panic set in. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing through the tunnels. The whispers followed, growing louder, more aggressive. The walls seemed to close in, the passages twisting and turning in impossible ways. I couldn't find my way out. At one point I tripped and fell, my flashlight skittering across the ground. In the darkness, I felt something cold and wet brush against my hand. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing the flashlight and shining it wildly. Nothing. But the whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices screaming unintelligible words. Finally, I saw the faint glow of daylight. With every ounce of strength, I ran toward it, bursting out of the mine and collapsing onto the ground outside. The whispers ceased instantly, replaced by the blessed silence of the forest. The aftermath. I returned to the inn, shaken but alive. The camera was still in my bag, filled with photos and recordings. But when I reviewed them, my blood ran cold. The images of the symbols and the altar were clear, but the figure was absent. In its place were smears of darkness, as if the shadows themselves had corrupted the film. The audio recordings were worse. The whispers were there, layered and distorted, but one phrase stood out, repeated over and over. "You brought it back." That night I dreamed of the figure. It stood at the foot of my bed, its burning eyes fixed on me. When I woke, the words were carved into the wall above my head, dripping with the same rust-colored substance from the altar. I left Hollow Creek the next morning, vowing never to return. But the whispers followed me. They're with me even now, growing louder with each passing day. And I know it's only a matter of time before it finds me again.